Okay, we're doing another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. To a really cool preview for you guys from the brand Jack Mason. A little about them. They're an independent American brand proudly based out of Dallas, Texas. They're most known for their popular and well-designed overbuilt fashion watches. Yes, overbuilt. While many mainstream fashion brands can pretty much be a letdown in the metal, Jack Mason has been a pleasant surprise for its customers, offering solid construction, sapphire crystals, and Swiss Superluminova BGW9 to a demographic that typically just buys mostly based on design aesthetics alone, and have now been inspired to expand into the highly competitive premium mechanical microbrand space, shifting the lessons learned dealing in higher volume aimed at a broad market into developing more enthusiast focused product lines. Now, this is actually an extension of a watch that I previewed previously on the channel known as the Stratotimer, which was kind of their first, venture into this space, and this as the follow-up punch is really impressive. These are of course dive watches. Some key common characteristics: it's not like when you're looking for a diver, you're going to want water resistance, typically with some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. Now, these are the Hydrotimer prototypes, and these are only two of the colorways. These are definitely more of the mainstream colorways that are available. There will also be two other kind of, and probably more at some point, more I'd say dynamic and kind of fun colorways. These are definitely though the ones I think most people will gravitate towards because they're just a bit more within the lines of a classic design, and that's what these are designed to be. These Hydrotimers really are designed to be an instant classic type of dive watch. Although it does share the same silhouette as a Stratotimer GMT, it's definitely packed with its own unique features, and of course still being assembled as part of these premium lines within these expansions here in the USA, as well as being regulated there. So that is definitely pretty neat. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, what I really like about these two are the contrast between them. They're very different from each other. One, of course, very glossy with gilt, and its warmth comes from those choices. Where here, the warmth comes from, of course, different choices. Instead of the glossiness, you're getting matte. You're also getting a bit of a texture on the dial that's probably hard to catch on camera, but I'll do my best to capture that kind of grainy, opaline, silvery tone, which is really nice and really beautifully accented by this almost anthracite gray bezel, which I'm sure is probably listed as black, matte black, but when you look at it straight on, it does look matte black, but the minute it captures some light, it's going to render visually another color, kind of like the dial being more of a silver tone but being visually white. That's where you're going to get a lot of that play. But the silhouette that these guys are in is definitely quite familiar, while still being quite different, right? Similarly to the Stratotimer, they've taken a lot of different elements that you may have seen before and just kind of paired them and reconfigured them in a way that you haven't seen yet. In terms of the dimensions, this is a 41 millimeter diameter watch with a 12.8 millimeter thickness, which is only actually 11.2 millimeters, not counting that beautiful box domed sapphire crystal. It does have a lug to lug of 47.2 millimeters, which is very nice. All fully stainless steel, brushed and polished, and it also has a hardness coating of 1200 hardness Vickers in terms of that anti-scratch resistant coating, which is great, and it's going to keep these watches looking nice, especially considering that these are prototypes that have probably done the rounds a bit. You can see they look pretty pristine to me and to my eye, which is very nice, and of course a feature that a lot of people have been clamoring for in a lot of different watches is something in terms of a proprietary toolless micro adjust system where it actually has so much room for adjustment that you can use it even as a diver's extension. Check that out. So very cool. I will say there have been definitely a lot of brands that have kind of thrown their hat into the foray to develop something, and I will say I'm pleasantly surprised by how nice this one came out for Jack Mason. Those of you who are thinking, well, that seems a bit long, if you look at the lug to lug of the watch, it's actually quite a bit shorter I guess if I could try to line this up, you can see. So yeah, it actually fits really well. And then also with the use of these really short links here in this kind of 3 link president style bracelet, it actually kind of, you don't really need a lot of micro adjust from that perspective, because these are all essentially half links, so you can already dial that in. The nice thing is you have enough extension here to where you could, again, just leave all these links be, tuck everything in, and then now use this as a diver's extension, or just, maybe if you want to wear a watch and share it with you and your significant other, you have quite a wide range, which I think is really cool and really suits this really timeless look, right? I think that they did a great job of, again, blending some of those elements that you have seen before, and then just in a new way, which I really like. And I mean, you can see there's a pretty stark difference even between these two models, which on paper share a lot in common, but somehow have quite different aesthetics when you just kind of have them side by side. So in terms of the price, these are not cheap, right? These are actually going for $9.89 direct, and that's as configured. There'll also be a free Tropic strap that comes with it, or you could save a little bit of money and get 2 straps instead of a strap and a bracelet, and you can get it for $8.89, which is still, up there. But when you consider the fact that these are USA designed, assembled, and even regulated, to a great tolerance, plus or minus 5 seconds, that's pretty nice. That is actually quite strong, especially, hard coating, toolless micro adjust clasp. Everything is, to the tens in terms of materials. You're going to be getting, sapphire, you're getting ceramic, applied indices, all the things that you kind of equate cost to in terms of refinement. It's going to be here. Even quick release spring bars, even a nice deep stamped case back. So there's definitely a lot of value there if you value that, right? At the end of the day, it can be a bit of a subjective thing. There's a lot of folks that are totally fine with a watch that isn't finished to this quality, that isn't running and regulated to this quality, and that's also fair. But for those folks that are kind of in the market for something at right around $1,000 and say, hey, well, I really want something where the brand is working hard for my money, right? Let's say there are those brands that are out there like Nomos or Grand Seiko, where you feel those brands are really working hard, trying to add value, trying to take things up a notch. I will say that Jack Mason is a brand like that in terms of within this space, they're really trying to have everything. It's the opposite of the race to the bottom, where you see so many of these quote unquote factory brands that are trying to give you the most things at the cheapest price, right? And it ends up being a very derivative, boring, or non-derivative and just kind of crazy looking watch that feels more like a wild card versus an everyday wear. Here, they're looking to really stuff as much value as they can into a certain price point that is probably pretty highly coveted. They're not even using a Swiss-made movement. But why use a Swiss-made movement when you are not doing a Swiss-made watch, especially when you consider how nice a lot of the the other countries and brands have come along with in terms of the quality of their movements, especially if they're being regulated additionally, then that's even better. So these are really, really cool. Another big difference is going to be, actually, I'll probably use this one because it'll be less smudgy. Is the bezel action. So, of course, this is based on the platform of a world time, or I should say a GMT watch. So those were bidirectional. Here you're going to get unidirectional. Ooh. Nice tactile clicks. 120 click. Still smooth, nice and grippy, of course, because of the bezel action there, which, can be a bit reminiscent of a Rolex bezel, but this doesn't look like a Rolex at all, which is something I absolutely can appreciate. So you're also getting a screw down crown, which is signed with that Lone Star again, and again more branding on this nice handsome case back, which is screwed in, not screw down. You can see there's four screws that hold it into place, which means they can make it to where it's going to always line up to where you can read it, which is a benefit there. So very, very nice. Though the movement you can't see, though, it's a Miyota automatic 9039, 42-hour power reserve, a nice 4 hertz sweep at 28,800 vibrations per hour in terms of the beat rate. And then again, it is regulated in-house to plus or minus 5 seconds per day, which is very, very strong. The indices are applied, and on this particular example, you're going to have an actual kind of coating over there. So these are going to have a gunmetal tint, which again ties in. It's those little tiny details which I really can't appreciate. You can see the beveling done on the handset. This thing is really cool. And then at the cardinal points, 12 o'clock, you're going to be getting a bit of a rounded triangle, and then in terms of all the other spots, you're going to get the circular indices, and then at the actual 3, 6, and 9, you're going to get the split indice, which looks really cool, especially when the second hand lines up right there, or the second hand lines up along another spot and then it splits it. I don't know, there's something visually very interesting and very fun about that. Also, of course, that red, white, and blue counterweight painting there is very nice. Here it's going to have the gilt treatment, so where it's going to be golden and just really warm and very saturated, whereas here it's going to have definitely more of a fade to it. And I really like that, especially considering that, hey, these are made with sapphire, with ceramic, with a hard coating. These are meant to stay looking pristine for as long as possible, so it's nice for them to have a little bit of character with the color play and the color palette that isn't necessarily forced patina. It's more so just making smart choices in terms of getting that maximum level of contrast and visual play. So with that said, let's actually get these pieces on the wrist and see how they wear. Okay, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears really, really well. Just drapes around the wrist perfectly. Nice short lug to lug ends there. And I might have a larger wrist at 7.5 inches, but I don't have a particularly flat wrist. It's actually quite round, so it's not like my wrist can support super large watches in general. But when I do get my wrist a bit close to the camera, you're going to get a bit of distortion in terms of the perspective. So what I like to do is just rest my wrist nice and low here, and then just tighten up the frame so that you guys can get a detailed look, but still keeping a truer aspect ratio of how this may wear on your own wrist. Very, very nice there. I love the curves. Everything just kind of flows together thematically. It feels like a completely designed watch. It doesn't feel like a mishmash or anything where, hey, these choices were made specifically to be different. I feel like the choices individually were made to look good and kind of flow well together. And that is another difference and benefit of a brand like Jack Mason, because these were designed by somebody who's trained as an industrial designer. A lot of times these independent brands today, which can produce really amazing watches, can be very much creator centric in that it's just kind of a watch enthusiast take on a watch, and maybe they don't have that formal training on the way things should be spaced out or what's balanced or compartmentalized in the way that the visual weight of the watch will be broken down between the mid case, between the bezel insert, and then that beautiful box domed sapphire there. So when you have a more trained eye, looking at this early on, you tend to find results that, again, feel quite linear and just that they fit together in a way that is just nice. I mean, it's still unexpected though, right? It still has its own charm, its own flair, but at the same time, it's you know, it doesn't shout another watch and then you just squint your eyes and then you just change the logo on it. Like, there was a lot of deliberate choices that were made for these watches, and I think a lot of them paid off, especially within these two very, very versatile colorways. I was really leaning towards the black, but I will say this white dial option, that extra bit of just play on the dial, really do it for me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to capture it here, but man, there is a bit of that shimmer there that I really, really like. And you can see it sits beautifully. That cushion case really just melts onto the wrist. That high polish is going to reflect a lot visually, and it's just going to make it look nice and slender, although it is quite slender. I mean, when you think about 11.2, not counting the crystal there, this relatively is quite slim and short, and it's definitely hits that sweet spot in terms of everyday wearability while also having a nice bit of retro flair. So with that said, let's actually get this off the wrist, set up for some lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, very nice lume, and even you can still differentiate between the two, right? There's a bit of a contrast between the black dial option and the white dial, where you're going to get the multicolored lume, which I think looks really great, especially considering you couldn't tell that it was going to be like this, in daylight. I think it's a nice, fun kind of surprise, and I would almost like to see that on every model. Just because I think it's very dynamic and flows really well. And again, it just adds something that's different, but different in a good way, right? But I will say, of course, that traditional all blue BGW9 also looks fantastic. But one thing I like to do, of course, is work in a bit of low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or maybe just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree, or spending some time in your favorite automobile. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting, which typically could, expose any types of production defects. But here you're just going to see, thanks to its choice of materials as well as its execution of that hard coating over the steel, it's just very pristine watches with maybe a couple fingerprints or some smudging here and there, but other than that, these are just looking beautifully pristine while still having quite a bit of character, especially when you start getting into some of that play in the low light, where you can actually notice the dynamic play between the colors within the lume, which I really, really enjoy. So these just do such a great job of, again, it's that blend, it's that balance between stuff that you recognize and that you like, that you want to see more of, while not appearing to be too derivative or lazy in design. Like, there's just a fair amount of detail that's been put together here that flows together. And again, for me, it's what separates this from your kind of average everyday run. And there are a lot of great micro brands out there, don't get me wrong, and you don't necessarily have to be a trained industrial designer to be able to design a great watch that a lot of people like. But I do think that does help in terms of just broad appeal and being able to find that balance and creating something that looks timeless without relying so heavily on taking elements from existing pieces, or at least existing mainstream pieces. You can dig pretty deep into the annals of horology and find some really niche pieces, and there's a lot of brands that do that, where they just kind of take the stuff that looked really cool at another time where it's less known now, and then they do it, and it's this great retro vintage design. But for me, guys, closing thoughts on the wrist: really classic proportions, fit most any situation, and this design helps both in terms of wear ergonomics as well as visual weight. So these are going to feel good and look good on a myriad of different wrist sizes. In terms of model variants, definitely check the site links in the description for options and availability. Again, these are going to be the two more, I'd say, traditional colorways, while there's going to be more of that kind of fun summertime colorway options also available. Now, in terms of comparable models, yes, the price point does put these divers in the upper tier of non-Swiss powered divers, but when it comes to features, these are easy to consider fully loaded. It's not like, hey, we could charge more if they added this. Like, they added all of those things, which is a common comment where people wish that they would go, brands would go more upscale, more original, more complete offerings, and really work harder for your dollar. And that's one of the things that Jack Mason has really done here that is quite impressive to me. So, when you have that fully loaded package, then you add to that USA assembly and regulation. I mean, even if you don't care for the US assembly, a regulated movement that's regulated within tight tolerances of +5 to -5 seconds per day, that is nice. And that is something that was worthwhile to a lot of folks. Sure, there's going to be those who just don't really care, and it's like, hey, if they wanted something more accurate, they can just look at their phone or buy a quartz watch. But for those of us that do look for those little value adds, I think that's something that I think most anybody can appreciate. So yeah, it's one of those things. Oh, also, not to mention, Jack Mason's been around for a few years. They're not brand new, right? They've been around. They've kind of went through multiple life cycles as a brand, and they're not going anywhere, which is, I think, something that probably is going to be a value add for a lot of folks who don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money on a brand with not a lot of history. So, just for fear of the brand going away someday. So for me, guys, the bottom line here is this diver isn't for everyone, but I don't really think it's meant to be. It's not some high volume, high consumption budget superstar. It's a passion project with a very specific taste in terms of the way that it was executed, and it's targeting like-minded audiences that can appreciate these details. So the Hydrotimer addresses so many of those shortcomings I've heard the wristwatch market complain about time and time again, whether it be in my comment section or the videos of others. So I'm really hopeful that those vocally unsatisfied folks that are out there will give divers like these a try, because they absolutely have done such a fantastic job of trying to do all of those things that people ask for, that they want, all those nice to haves, and just putting it together in a very conclusive package. So these are really cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing the production models eventually, and seeing also what other types of color combinations that they put together. I definitely have some ideas on some cool colorways I'd like to see, and if my channel ever gets big enough, maybe we can do an exclusive collaboration one day. But until then, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please would like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.